Welcome to Alzheimer's Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation as usual as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort.
Here we go. What you think about, you will bring about dementia change. We will.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer's Speaks. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm thrilled that you can join us today. We are going to be having an absolutely marvelous conversation with Mary Lou Falcone, who has written this wonderful book called I Didn't See It Coming. And her husband had Lewy Body Dementia. But before I introduce you to her, I want to just invite you to join us for Arthur's Senior Care Memory Cafe, which we do the second and the fourth Wednesday of each month from about 1 to 3 o'clock Central Time. And we do that virtually. If you're interested, just reach out to me at Lori, Lori, at alzheimersspeaks.com. Also on the last Wednesday of every month from 10 to 11:30, we meet at the Shoreview Community Center here in Minnesota. And that is a Caregiver Connect group where we also have respite for those living with dementia. And you can call directly to register at 763-913-6140. And then, of course, I would be amiss if I didn't direct you to alzheimersspeaks.com, where you can access all of our free educational resources, as well as tapping into Dementia Map, which is our global resource directory. And don't forget to check out our book, Betty the Bald Chicken, Lessons in How to Care. Let's go ahead and introduce you to Mary Lou. Well, Mary Lou, I have been just anxiously awaiting this conversation because I just adore you. I was able to talk with her a few months ago, and we got this on the schedule, and you are going to love this conversation and get such great heartfelt insights that I think will really help. So Mary Lou, you can introduce yourself much better than I can to the audience. So if you don't mind giving them a little background about yourself.
With pleasure. And Lori, thank you for inviting me on. I am Mary Lou Falcone, and I began life as a caregiver. At age 10, my dad had a massive stroke that enabled him to live. He did live, but he didn't speak again for the rest of his life. And so I became that caregiver for my dad, for my younger siblings, my brother and sister, as my mother held down 3 jobs to keep the family together. So caregiving was not new to me. In later life, when my husband, Nikki, was diagnosed with Lewy Body Dementia. But in between those years, probably we're talking almost 70 years. In between those years, caregiving was kind of a theme throughout my life. And that as a professional singer, I of course was out there performing for the public, but then I started a public relations business in 1973, exactly 50 years ago. And that was another form of caregiving for artists. I had the privilege of representing every classical music artist plus James Taylor that I've ever wanted to, and it's been just a great run with that. But it is also a form of caregiving. So among the careers were the caregiving, of course, the singing, the teaching. I also taught along the way, and the public relations business, ending now with being an advocate for Lewy Body Dementia and awareness of that disease.
Thank you. And Lewy body is one of those things that so many people don't really understand and until recently didn't even know about. And so I think that's one of the reasons this conversation is going to be so helpful to so many, especially as diagnoses change, which people don't anticipate that that's part of the game of dementia here, this kind of switching around, being able to be prepared. If you don't mind sharing a little bit about you and your husband Nikki, and sharing just a hair in the beginning here, kind of setting us up for his dementia journey and yours alongside him.
Yes. Nikki was a force of nature. It's the best way to describe him. In the 1950s, he was a for real rock and roller in the first wave of rock and roll. Now, everybody says, oh, sure, all the kids had basement bands and garage bands. Not Nikki. At age 14, he was on the road. And he was on the road with the likes of Johnny Cash, Patsy Cline, Jerry Lee Lewis. So he had a wonderful old time until he reached the age of 21. And he decided, enough of this rock and roll. I'm going to go back to a passion that I've held all along the way, and that is being an artist. And so after making thousands and thousands of dollars as a teenager, as a rocker, he then basically made $45 his first year in art. And but that didn't bother him at all, because he knew that's where the passion was. And as fate would have it, Nikki became one of the premier artists of our day in the area of illustration, caricature, and cartooning. He then went on to be an oil painter, but his major work today hangs in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And he is also said by the museum to have been the inspiration for Roy Lichtenstein. So that's Nikki in a nutshell. But I will add one thing, and that is that when he passed, the letters that I got described him better than I ever could. And every single letter said the same thing. Nikki Zan made us feel special. Can't ask for more than that.
Oh, got me teary-eyed. Wow, what a man. What a man. That is powerful. Thank you for that setup. Let's talk about your book. I didn't see it coming. Scenes of Love, Loss, and Lewy Body Dementia. What made you decide to write the book? I mean, that's a big step. It's a huge commitment, and it's, putting your whole life out there for everyone to see.
Right. Well, I'm the person that for over 50 years said, I will never write a book. Well, lesson learned, never say never, because one doesn't know what will pop up. And about maybe 3 months before Nikki passed, he said to me, Mary Lou, you have to write. And I thought to myself, write what? And I just sort of tucked it away in the back of my mind. I didn't think much of it. And then Nikki passed, and that was in July of 2020. And all of a sudden, you know how those light bulb moments happen in your life? I had a light bulb moment. I knew not only that I had to write, I knew what I had to write. And I had to write about the disease, about the progression, about the journey, and about us. I began by writing about the disease because I was getting two questions consistently. One was, Lewy what? And how do you spell that? Well, if you can't spell Lewy, you're never going to find Lewy body dementia. And so I started the writing process, and I front-loaded the book with all things Lewy body. And it was very thorough and very comprehensive. And then I went into a little bit about my life and how that journey then took me to Lewy body. And a very brilliant editor, whom my publisher suggested, said to me, Mary Lou, if we don't care about you and Nikki, we are never going to care about what you want us to care about, which is Lewy body dementia. And so I rewrote and I rewrote and I rewrote. But in the final rewrite, I was very happy with that advice, because she was right. She was 1,000,000% right. You need to bring people into your world. You need to share, and share openly and honestly as best you can with them. And you can't hold back. Some of the stuff that I wrote was so sanitized that it was actually boring, because it didn't tell the whole truth. It always told the truth. But if you're going to do this, you need to tell the whole truth. You just need to open yourself up, rip yourself apart, and tell the whole truth. And that's what I eventually did. And I am actually today very happy that I did it, because I see the results of how people are responding to this and relating it to their own lives.
What I love about that is, so often we're so scared to share the whole story, to be our authentic self, to be judged, or we're not supposed to have those emotions, but we all have them, we're all hiding them in the basement, or whatever. And what we don't really appreciate is that it creates a safe space for others to feel and be authentic. And when you do that, you create this safety net that's just like this huge global hug that says you're okay and we'll get through this together.
How well described that is, because I've been on the road for the last couple of weeks to places like the University of Nebraska Medical Center and the Mayo Clinic. And I've been very privileged to speak to those people. And what I've been getting back is exactly affirmation of what you're saying, which is people will come up and say, because you dare to be vulnerable with us, we can open up and be vulnerable back. And what a gift that is, both ways, I might add.
Oh, definitely. I know when I started on this journey, I joined the National Speakers Association, and it was like they had a couple of rules back then, and it was like, pick a path. Who are you going to talk to? Are you going to talk with the medical professionals? Are you going to talk with the direct care? Are you going to talk with the families? The people with dementia weren't even included in it. And I'm like, I want to talk with everybody, because if we aren't inclusive, we'll never make sustainable change. And then the other rule was, oh, you can't get that emotional. You need to take them on the highs and lows, but don't you dare get teary. Don't let your voice crack. And I'm like, I'm letting it all out. And I don't know when it's going to happen when I speak, but I'm going to be my authentic self. And like you, I hear people say all the time, oh my gosh, you had me in tears, but then you had me laughing, because that's the whole package. It's not all doom and gloom, and it's not all, rose colored glasses either.
No, and if you can't share the whole package, then you're doing a disservice, because, yes, there are highs, yes, there are lows, but there's everything in between. Mm-hmm. So it's important to let caregivers know that they're not the only ones going through this. It's so important to let them know that they're not alone. Yeah. And that's a message that I am screaming from the rafters with real journey items. You walk the path, you share the path.
And I have found it's just a beautiful path. I mean, you meet the most interesting people, and like you said, it's a two-way sharing. I can't believe how much I've learned from other people, and I knew that would happen, but it has even surpassed what I thought I would learn. I mean, it's just the stories out there, and some of them just morph mine. And I encourage people, get your voice out there, because bottom line is, we are not going to get the services, products, and tools we need if nobody knows what's really going on.
Exactly right. And I'm finding, and this is revelatory, I'm finding the medical community, the doctors, actually coming up to say thank you. We need to hear reality from the caregivers. That to me has been just astonishing, that they seem to be not just listening, they seem to be embracing what's being said. What a gift.
And I think part of it gives them hope, because they don't know the other side. And so there's so much of this zip-lipped going on in terms of even, if I give somebody a diagnosis, who do I refer them to? And it's the everyday story that teaches people how to live graciously with the disease. I mean, we still need the academic and the medical models, because that teaches us something totally different than the in the trenches. But we need to merge them if people are going to live well together.
Absolutely. And I hadn't experienced the openness of the medical profession 3, 4, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I hadn't gotten that, except for a couple of exceptions, but generally speaking, not. And now it's just the opposite. The doors are flinging open. They are greeting and welcoming. And I say yes. For every caregiver out there, everyone needs this.
Yeah. And so for people listening, share your stories with your doctor. I mean, that's okay. I know time is limited when you're meeting with them. Sometimes you can write things up, certain things happen that just are so heartfelt. And there's stories the doctors can use to comfort other people too, without disclosing who you are or any of that kind of jazz.
That's right.
But again, it removes that I'm all by myself. Nobody understands. No one's here to help. And it builds, I think, a level of compassion in all of us. And we have to layer that over time, especially in the world we're living in. We've kind of lost that.
Absolutely. But you said something just a couple of sentences back that I want to underscore because it was such a good comment. And that was about writing it down. Sometimes they don't have the time to sit and listen. But if you dare to write down your story, if you dare to write down those thoughts, along with all the medical things that are going on, but it can be so helpful. And I would highly recommend it because one doesn't remember from day to day all the detailing that is important to share with the doctors. And especially if you have multiple doctors, they all need the same information, and actually logging it will serve that purpose.
And sharing it with other family members too, because they don't always see, especially if you're the primary care partner, they don't always see what you see.
That's true.
And that can really help. Plus, did you find this whole process healing for you? I know for me, writing, if it was a blog, if it was journaling, if it was a book, it was all a healing process that I didn't really expect when I did it.
Yeah. I sat and wrote very often late at night because it was very quiet and peaceful. And I don't mind saying this, I would sit and write with tears streaming down my face. Mm-hmm. I mean, the desk was so wet, it was ridiculous. But after I did that, there was this feeling of just release of pressure and gratitude that I was able to share it, number one. And secondly, that I was able to actually let it out, which was so important after the fact. Because during, yes, you go in another room and you can scream into a pillow and you can inhale lavender and you can do all kinds of technique things that work to get your equilibrium back, and then walk in with that smiling face to your loved one so that there's a calm, because that's really important, that the angst and the energy that you're feeling that isn't so positive is not shared with your loved one. However, after the fact, you can let it all out. There's no reason to censor it.
I can so relate to that, writing late at night in the street. I mean, where I could barely see, and sometimes I had to stop writing because I was crying so hard. But, I'm one that kind of bottles it up, and I'll put on the Stepford wife smile and I'll do the task at hand. And I didn't really even know that I was kind of doing this big cover up thing, that I was projecting what I thought I had to be in other people's eyes so that they were comfortable. And I was ignoring how I was comfortable or my loved one was comfortable, because I think I had this fear of judgment of others that I didn't even know until I started writing stuff down. And then it was like, oh, it's okay. It's okay to be this, and
that's interesting.
And you can't move through it if you don't acknowledge it. Then you get stuck.
Yeah.
And so that release, that crying was, that writing down, all of that was very, very powerful for me.
Yeah, I didn't quite have the same experience, but mine was slightly different in that in going through it, I knew that it was important for Nikki's dignity, for his well-being, for feeling good about himself, because I do believe that anybody with dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's or Lewy body, any of them, that somewhere deep inside, your loved one is still there. And very often what you experience is what I would fondly call, in the Lewy body world, you'd experience Lewy, or in the Alzheimer's world, you'd experience Al, and you kind of lose sight sometimes that your loved one is very much there, maybe not in that very moment, but somewhere in the deep recesses, your person is, and they feel, and I do believe that they take in positive energy and loving energy just as quickly as they take in negative energy. And so I always felt that it was my responsibility to bring in the positive energy at all times. Now, did I miss? Yeah, of course I did. Everybody does. But one has to learn to, when you do miss, when you are edgy, when you've had it, kind of like up to here and then beyond, you need to then forgive yourself for losing it, for not being the perfect person, because nobody on the planet is. And in forgiving yourself, you can go back for the next round and do a little better, try a little harder. And it'll happen again, guaranteed. But it's important for you to know that you're human and you need to take care of you also, not just your loved one. So it's that balancing act that's consistently there. And when you do have those moments of, I've had it, I'm going to scream, I can't take another minute, take yourself out of the room, scream into a pillow. I usually use the F word, which I do not use in real life, but I can tell you that if you use heck, darn, damn, it's not going to do it. Mm-hmm. You just scream the word into a pillow. And then I would take a lavender sachet and I would inhale very deeply, like a yoga breath, to calm everything down. And that made an enormous difference. Then I could go back in genuinely smiling, genuinely at peace.
Yeah, it is amazing when you release. I used to go downstairs, everyone would leave the house. I'd make sure all the windows were shut and I would just scream at the top of my lungs. And I would have a conversation with God. And what I realized for me was even though I was thinking that I was trying to resolve whatever was going on, that I was like swirling in the minutia of everything. And when I would go downstairs and I would yell, and I'm like, finally I started yelling, what's my lesson? There's got to be a lesson in this. And then usually within 20 minutes to 2 days, the clarity was unbelievable because I was asking the right question. I was looking for the right thing, because we don't always have the answers. And so you have to, for me anyways, I had to broaden the net and say, okay, I don't really know. I don't really know. Yeah. And then the other thing I would do was, you had mentioned the yoga breath. I would take like 11 deep breaths, and on my inhale, I would ask God or my higher power to give me whatever I need in that moment. And I used to be specific, but again, I don't really always know what I need. And so I just left it open. And then on my exhale, I would ask for all the toxins in my mind, body, and soul to leave the building. And so I kind of felt like it was a double fold. But, those deep breaths change our whole mechanisms in our body and can ground us. It's kind of like going back to, I think when my mom says, count to 10, when I was little, count to 10 before you react. It was just that rebalancing act. But those little pieces add up. And you're so correct when you said they can soak in the joy or they can soak in the negative. I mean, and they'll mirror it back.
Absolutely.
And sometimes we don't even know when we're being negative because we think we're being kind of that Stepford Wives and we've got it all covered, but they're seeing the roll of our eyes or they're hearing that soft sigh of, oh my gosh, I don't know how much of this I can do. They're taking all that stuff in on us.
Yeah. And just the vibration, vibrations alone are very, very strong. I would, when Nikki couldn't get up from the table anymore, for instance, instead of just picking him up, I would go over as if I needed a hug, and I would embrace him completely. And then as I was embracing him, lift him, because it was, again, the dignity that was being preserved and the feeling of a loving touch rather than, okay, time to get up. It doesn't quite work. and being given the strength. You were just alluding to that, and asking for the strength to get through things. Last week, I was at the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia with music students, and we're talking about the book, and we were talking about my journey, etc. When I got done, one 20-year-old young man raised his hand, and he said, "I have a question. How did you do it?" And I took a deep breath, and I don't proselytize or any of that, but I did say, I had my faith. And with my faith came a belief that there's a lot more than me around.
Mhm.
And you call it whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to label it. But because of faith and my belief in prayer, and Nikki also believed in that, I was able to get through every day, asking for help from beyond me. And I will also add to that, we were helped by COVID. Odd to say, most people found COVID, just a horror. Not us. We were into, I guess it was the last 5 months of Nikki's life. It was when COVID hit. And it's just when I needed to be only with him 24/7. And I could be. What a gift. I mean, we have Thanksgiving coming up and the holiday season, and you think about all the things you're thankful for. I'm thankful.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk a little bit about Lewy body and how it's different from Alzheimer's disease. And were you told that, upon diagnosis, or did you have to figure that out yourself?
I will say that our neurologist was a genius at diagnosis. He knew from a cognitive test and watching Nikki walk and said, this is Lewy body dementia with Parkinsonian aspects, right out of the gate. From then on, I learned very quickly with all the questions that I had, the pages of questions that I prepared for various visits. What I learned was I was on my own. There was no help being given, no help being offered. Now, the reasons I'll never know, but that was the fact. So I had to find my own answers. And that was a process.
I would say I felt the same. And it was really through storytelling and just letting my mind be able to play with different scenarios of how do we turn this around, or
Yeah.
how do we, I came up with like the reaction equation. I'm trying to figure out, for my mom, she had Alzheimer's disease. Why did she react that way? Instead of blaming it and saying it's wrong, it's like, no, it's a clue. It's a clue to me, and I have to figure out why. And then that pulled me back to look, kind of in what I imagined her world to be like and how she came to that conclusion. And there was always a rational reason when I stepped into that space.
Her space.
Yes.
Her space, not yours.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. But you asked a question about the difference between Alzheimer's and Lewy body.
Mm-hmm.
So they're both neurodegenerative diseases. And Lewy body is the second most progressive dementia after Alzheimer's disease, affecting 1.4 million people in this country alone. And that's a big number. And when you stop to think about, some of the celebrities who have had it, Robin Williams did and didn't know it, Estelle Getty, Casey Kasem, Dina Merrill, and the list can go on. The fact is that it manifests itself very similarly. That is, LBD, Lewy body dementia, manifests itself very similarly to Alzheimer's disease, meaning that there is decline, there is cognitive decline. But there are two major factors that distinguish it. Well, three, actually. One is that REM, sleep disorder, is part of Lewy body. That means that when you're dreaming, instead of just dreaming that you're rolling down a hill or running down a hill, and if we dream, our limbs aren't actually moving. But with Lewy body, you'll find the legs moving. Or the person's dreaming that he's punching a punching bag. Well, you, the person in bed with this person, may become the punching bag because they punch out. So it is acting out. That's one. Second, very strong difference is the hallucination. Hallucinations, audio or visual, are part of Lewy body very often in the early stages. And the third and probably most telling difference is that Lewy body is like being on a roller coaster, meaning one day your loved one is 100% themselves. And this can be many years into the disease, not just at the beginning. And the next day, that person doesn't even know who you are. So it fluctuates back and forth and back and forth. And there were times, even toward the end of Nikki's life, when I would just, we'd be having a conversation, everything was clear and lucid. And then an hour later, I would say, Nikki, do you know who I am? And he'd say, no, but that's all right. And those are the basic differences among those two diseases.
Yeah, the sleep disorder, the dreams, the vividness, and I mean, I know people that are afraid to go to sleep because they're afraid they're going to hurt somebody or kill somebody, literally. And the fear of being attacked and having to fight, and doctors giving medication to sleep, but their body is fighting going to sleep because they're just so scared.
Anxious.
And I can't imagine being that terrified, or couples sleeping in different beds because they don't want to get hurt.
We didn't. I maintained our very comfortable large bed, and I felt the partnership, the importance of that loving touch in the middle of the night was incredibly important. There was a moment, though, when I was advised to make sure that all the knives were under lock and key. And even now, as I say that, I get a chill, because the horror of that, when somebody tells you, lock up all your knives, it takes your breath away.
Yep.
Happily, that didn't happen to us. It didn't get violent, but it can.
Well, and when you talked about the roller coaster, I remember people on my dementia chats talk about, they're like, I can be great, and then I'm like out of it for 3 days, sometimes a week. And then I pop right back up again and I'm ready to go. And they're like, they couldn't explain it, but they would just be exhausted and nothing was connecting and they were frustrated. And that's just got to be horrible. And I've also heard people talk about body temperature changes. And I mean, there's so many different elements that can come into play. And I think of how many people have been diagnosed and then it's changed. So they start out as Alzheimer's, then it's Lewy body, then they tell them, no, it's mild cognitive impairment. And people are just like, they want an answer, but this is not an easy thing to always diagnose, especially if you don't have a specialist that really understands. You can go to a neurologist that doesn't specialize in dementia, and that's going to make a difference in and of itself. Right. Why do you think so many people don't know about Lewy body and the stats as a whole?
I think, first of all, it is a matter of the amount of attention that has been paid to it. I think that Alzheimer's, I mean, if 50 years ago, we weren't calling Alzheimer's. We were calling it hardening of the arteries or some such senility, and all of a sudden, somewhere along the line, the name Alzheimer's became known. It became known because a lot of people were dealing with it, and a lot of famous people were dealing with it. And when you get famous people in the mix, all of a sudden there is attention. When the attention happens, there is money. Then that gets spent on the research that needs to be done. And as the research gets done, there are leads to the cure for any of these diseases. So Alzheimer's was the first one out of the gate with all of this. Right now, if you've noticed, frontotemporal dementia, which Bruce Willis and his family have come out and talked about, all of a sudden, that's getting a lot of attention. Why? Because a celebrity name, brave celebrity name, is out there connected with it and his family. So Lewy body is the next frontier, as far as I'm concerned. It has probably been around for decades and decades, but not really recognized by name until about the 1990s. So it is relatively new on the dementia forefront. Not on the dementia front, because it's been there, but being recognized. And now things like my book, I Didn't See It Coming, or other people who are out there just beating the drum for it, we are the ones who are going to bring more attention to it. My premise is that by bringing attention to it, you're going to have people caring more about it, at least knowing what it is. If they do, then it's easier to raise money for it. When the money comes in for research and that machinery starts grinding and picking up steam, we're going to find retardants, and then we're going to find cures. And that's the process. We're just in the middle of the process.
It's kind of like cancer. Everything was cancer, and then it's like, oh no, there's breast cancer, there's lung cancer.
That's right.
There's that.
That's right.
And we're finding more and more. And then we're finding, like with my mom, when she passed, we did an autopsy. It showed she had Alzheimer's, Lewy, and Parkinson's. And Lewy and Parkinson's were never diagnosed with her. And but who wants to offer up an autopsy when you still have life to live? That's not going to work. So, it's how do you test it? How do you learn about it? And again, people need to share their stories with this. And it can change. A diagnosis can change from doctor to doctor. Too, depending, and that can be really frustrating for families.
Well, as you were describing your mom, you said Alzheimer's, but then you said that there were these moments when she would come back. That's Lewy body. That's not Alzheimer's, because if it's straight Alzheimer's, it's a clear path downward that just, it can plateau and all of that, but it doesn't come back. If you have Lewy body in there, it can come back. So that comorbidity part is something that just now we're hearing more and more about.
Exactly. For those of you who are just tuning in right now, we've been talking with Mary Lou Falcone. She is internationally known as a classic music publicist and strategist, but she has lived the life of dementia with her husband through Lewy body. And she has written a beautiful, beautiful book called I Didn't See It Coming, Scenes of Love, Loss, and Lewy Body Dementia. And so again, if you're just tuning in, you'll probably want to rewind and catch the beginning of this, because it's just been a beautiful conversation with some great insights. You can always go to her website, MaryLouFalcone.com, where you can purchase her book. Or she also recommends going to the Lewy Body Resource Center, which is the Lewy Body Resource Center.org for information as well. We're going to continue on with this conversation because I've just found it so interesting, and I appreciate your honesty, and it's so nice to talk to an authentic person who is willing to share it all and isn't embarrassed about it or ashamed. It's just part of the journey. And I think sharing our stories, it's kind of like the glue that holds us all together, makes us not feel so alone. So when you, over your life, you've cared for many, many different people, from your dad to your husband and things. What can make a difference when you're caring for a loved one? What are some of your key tips?
When you're caring for a loved one, I think it's important to remember that even when that loved one doesn't seem to be there, they are there. Some way, shape, or form, they respond to that touch, to that kiss on the cheek, to that hug. Those are very important moments. I also think that there are three things that people really need to know. One is that they're loved. Secondly, that they're safe. And third, that they're protected. Those are important elements. I also think that there is no blame, there is no shame. Things will happen along the way. And, your body gives out, your body functions are not always what you would wish they were. And I won't get into it graphically because we all know we're talking about incontinence, we're talking about all kinds of things. And those are moments when you just need to be on the cleanup crew, but also to allow the person that you're with to know that it's not their fault. You cannot blame them, and they can't be ashamed of what's happening, because it is not it's not what anybody would want. It's certainly not, no one asked for it. And lastly, it just happens. So the acceptance of that is incredibly important. So no blame and no shame.
Yeah, it's not like they're doing it on purpose,
No,
and I mean, it can be incontinence or it could be a spewing of incontinence, when they're saying things that you've never heard them say before.
no.
It's the disease, and really remembering not to take it personally, with that. And how would you want to be treated?
Well,
You know?
exactly. And it, when someone comes out with an expletive or something really crazy and or hurtful, it's the disease talking.
Hmm.
It's not your loved one. And
Yep.
to remember that is so important and hard. No, I'm not going to sit here and tell you this is an easy journey. It's not. It simply is not. But there are so many beautiful moments within it if you will allow them to be, and not just let the anger get the better of you. Also, other people, we're surrounded by people who want to do well, who
Mhm.
want to do what's right, who want to help. But what I had to learn was not everybody is capable of understanding and or of helping you. There are people who can't.
Yeah.
And I had to learn on my journey that those are people that I had to forgive, because your first reaction is, well, can't you come and help me? I mean, can't you be there for me or for your loved, your brother, your sister? And the answer is, honestly, there are those who cannot.
Yeah.
And you just have to love them and wish them well and not take it personally. And that's hard. I'm not going to tell you it's easy. It's very hard to do that. But then there are people who surprise you, who don't ask you, what do you need? They drop off a fully cooked meal,
Mhm.
or they send your favorite flower, or they make a phone call that just says, I'm thinking about you today.
Yeah.
What gifts, what beautiful gifts.
Well, and I think too, I know like my brothers were two that they just couldn't do what I wanted from them, what I expected of them. Because I think we all think, well, everyone's like us, so they should just get this, because on our minds, it's so clear of what needs to be done and how to do it. And I'll never forget the conversation. This was after my dad had died. And I was sharing some stories saying, I think I'm going to write a book, which I still haven't written this one yet. And I was sharing stories about mom. And my older brother said, where'd you get the stories? And I remember, I think I probably shook my head like I was there. And it was in that moment that I looked at both my brothers so differently, and I felt sorry for them because they don't have all the moments that I have, because they chose not to be able to be part of the difficult times. They lost out on all the incredible times, or just day to day, precious little things that we take for granted. They missed all that.
Oh, yes.
And and that and that moment allowed me to go, I can't change this. This is their journey. And I was trying to like cram them into a into a little crack and come down my river,
Right,
and
right.
it wasn't working. And I realized when I finally let go that I had more time for me. I had more time to care the way I wanted to, and I wasn't carrying their burden. And I didn't even realize I was carrying that on my shoulders until I let it go.
Yeah.
And that was pretty powerful, time.
Very powerful. And we would wish for those we care about and love that they would invest in a way that actually they will gain from, they'll be nourished by. But if they don't want to go there or they can't go there, I don't think it's that they don't want to. I think that there are certain people who are wired in such a way that they're unable to. And that's a reality.
And that's okay. Like I always say, the world would be pretty boring if everybody was a clone of me,
Yeah. Yeah.
or a clone of you. I mean, that just makes the world go round, and realizing everybody has their own choices and consequences and journeys in this life, and they're all a little bit different. Gosh, there's so many more things I want to ask of you. I want to see if you have any helpful hints for caregivers, just briefly, that you want to share with our audience.
I do. I think for caregivers, it is very important to carve out a little bit of time every day for yourself. That can mean sitting and doing nothing, having a cup of tea. It can mean finding someone to come and sit with your loved one while you go out and take a walk around the block. It can mean going and getting your nails done or your hair cut. Or if you need a weekend, I had an acquaintance who would get a beautiful and responsible caregiver in one weekend a month, who would stay the entire weekend with her husband while she came into New York City, got a hotel room, and just ordered room service the entire weekend, just to be alone and burden-free for that 48 hours.
Be able to sleep or do whatever you want without.
Didn't matter. You could mindlessly watch television. It didn't matter. You just knew that your loved one was being cared for and that you could do that. I think that those are important things. The caregiver, if you don't take care of yourself, what's going to happen if something happens to you? What's going to happen to your loved one? I think that when you think of it that way, you don't think of it as being selfish, because being caring about your own well-being is never selfish. It's actually just the opposite. It's being protective so that you can do what needs to be done on a long-term basis. But nobody can shoulder 24/7, years in and years out, the responsibility of caregiving. You have to take breaks, and you have to absolutely schedule them. It's a necessity. It's not a nice thing to do. It is a necessity. It is necessary.
Yeah, that would be nice if that was worked in from the doctor.
It would be
part of the conversation, because it's not something that we feel like we have permission to do or we should do. Yeah, I know you feel very strongly about having the message that you're not alone. How do you feel people should connect so that they don't feel they're alone?
Yeah, I think that support groups, now I understand everybody is not comfortable in a support group, but if you've got the right support group, like-minded people who aren't afraid to share with one another, and also small support groups are very helpful, because you can really open up in those forums, whether they be in person or on Zoom calls, whatever. That's something that the Lewy Body Dementia Resource Center does brilliantly, which is they have support groups for caregivers, and those are anywhere from like 6 people to 12 people on a support group, and it works incredibly well. They also have support groups for what they call the crew. The crew are those people with Lewy body dementia. I've also heard them called warriors, which I rather like too. And those folks are people who are dealing day to day with the disease. It is in them. And they are talking to one another. And that seems to be incredibly helpful, rather than mixing everybody together. That does not work particularly well. So there are all these ways of reaching out and having people reach out to you. And sometimes, in these support groups, there are questions that will come up which are so personal that people don't want to ask them. And so they'll say, is there somebody offline who will talk to me? And I always know that that's code for there's something that's bothering me deeply and I can't share it with the group. When I was on those support groups, I would be the person to volunteer to talk to them, because I 9 times out of 10, I would assume that the discussion would go into sexuality, and it did. That's exactly where it went. It's something people don't talk about, that your loved one, it's probably, in my opinion, the last vestige that they have of controlling. And it is something that can't be taken away from them. And therefore, they will hang on to it and want it to be part of what they're about. And those are times where it's difficult. You have to learn to navigate and deal. And perhaps if you're able to fulfill the need, and if you're not, find ways to, because it is something that I believe is deeply seated. And again, it's the only thing that the person can control at a certain point.
Mm-hmm. Well, that I'm glad you mentioned that, because it is important. Not everything can be for everyone discussed openly, and there are groups like memory cafes that have the people with dementia and their care partners together. There's like dementia mentors, where a person newly diagnosed with any type of dementia can sign up to be mentored by somebody who is diagnosed, which is a whole different kind of ball of wax versus one of us thinking that we know what it's like. But again, we haven't lived the path. We haven't actually been diagnosed. So, Mary Lou, this has just been such a great conversation. Now, as for your book, what can people expect in your book?
They can expect to laugh. They can expect to cry. They can expect to be taken on a very unexpected and kind of interesting journey of a life that basically concludes with the caregiving experience in great detail. So you can read it on a level of just an entertaining story, which I'm told it is, and I hope it is. But you can also read it as a bit of a handbook toward the end of it, so that you can get a sense of what it feels like to be that caregiver, what it feels like to be the person who has the disease, and helpful hints of how you can treat any dementia. It's not just Lewy body dementia, it's dementia in general. And I think that seems to be the value of this, as people are relating it back to me.
Okay. And I think so often too, like our journeys with dementia, they are so much bigger. So much of what we learn, or anyways, what I've learned, I can apply in many areas of my life. It's really about looking and communicating different, and being less judgmental, which again, I think is welcomed in all areas of life for that. So, and being a compassionate person. I just can't thank you enough for spending this hour with us. And wrapping up, again, we have been talking with Mary Lou Falcone on Lewy Body Dementia and her wonderful book, which is called I Didn't See It Coming. And you can get her book by going to her website. I'm sure it's on Amazon as well. Is that
It
correct?
is, yes.
There. And, I always ask my audience to be a giver of hope. Like, click, and share this episode. Again, not because I track the numbers, not because that's important to me. It's not. It's because there are people in your sphere of influence that need to hear Mary Lou's story. It will help lift them up, and get them through a journey ahead of them. And maybe just encourage them to start sharing their story. And the more of us, that can start sharing our stories, we build this tribe and this community to say it's safe to talk about this. This is a reality, and it's the only way we're going to get services, products, and tools and support that we need. So please be a giver of hope. It takes no time, it costs you no money, just to click on a little icon and share it with others. And again, don't forget to check out the Lewy Body Resource Center as well. That's a .org. Again, Mary Lou, thank you so much, and keep up your profound work. You're really making a
It is I who thank you.
Difference.
Thank you.
So in wrapping up, again, I hope you learned as much out of this episode as I did. And please check out alzheimersspeaks.com. Go to our free educational resource center. Check out our book, Betty the Bald Chicken, Lessons in How to Care. And of course, visit dementiamap.com, our global resource directory. Have a wonderful week, everyone. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.